Hello Zero Books readers. In this video we'll take a look at ideas from Angela Nagle's Kill All Normies, as well as notions lifted from Josie Appleton's Officious, two seemingly disparate books that, when taken together, help to shed light on a philosophical concept that some Marxists consider to be a law, not of nature, but of reason or dialectical logic. We'll see how what Nagle calls transgressive politics arises in a social order that Appleton claims is shaped by what she calls the busybody state. But before we do any of that, I want to tell you about something that's bothering me personally. Namely, I've noticed that as I've gotten older, I have more aches and pains, and this has led me to realize that, despite previous feelings of invincibility, it's possible that this body of mine will, perhaps sooner than I like to think, give out. This is especially vexing as I don't believe that I am anything other than my body. I don't believe there is a ghost in the machine, or that one day Quetzalcoatl will return to fetch my bones from the underworld, or that Christ will give me a new and better body, or that I'll live forever inside the Matrix. Even worse, when I try to consider myself as part of the larger human species, I think about how I'll live on in my progeny, I'm still faced with perhaps a not too distant annihilation.
This is kind of a modern myth I'm about to spell out for you. In fact, I may not read it, I may just gloss it. It's a modern myth that I'd like to spell out for you that many of us believe. And let's see, after we've examined this myth, if this is more or less comforting than the beautiful myth of redemption in, say, for example, the Bible. The myth is something like this. There are billions and billions of stars. The earth is a tiny one. We crawl across it for just a few seconds. And then we individually are gone. Billions and billions of eons of time before and billions afterwards pass. And the earth eventually goes out like a cinder, and perhaps the whole universe collapses into itself. And after all that's happened, absolutely nothing will have been done. Now, that's a very important myth. Many of us believe that one too. But against that background, it becomes difficult as we chip away at our daily little lives, selling shoes, selling tires, teaching class, to try to find any damn thing that means anything.
Let's take a break from existential dread and ask ourselves about what the social and political consequences of this pervasive nihilism might be. Well, according to the Slovenian psychoanalyst and philosopher Slavoj Žižek, the consequence might be different than we'd expect. Žižek argues that rather than creating a permissive society where anything goes, the death of God has set up a world filled to the brim with prohibitions. Quote, "What characterizes modernity is no longer the standard figure of the believer who secretly harbors intimate doubts about his beliefs and engages in transgressive fantasies. What we have today is a subject who presents himself as a tolerant hedonist dedicated to the pursuit of happiness, but whose unconscious is a site of prohibitions. What is repressed are not illicit desires or pleasures, but prohibitions themselves. That is, since God is dead, nothing is permitted." In her book Officious, Josie Appleton suggests that this world of prohibitions without prohibitions is a world of the busybody state. In a world without a future, a world without a foundation, a world without some big meaning-lending concept like God, we end up with a, quote, state defined by distinct forms of legal regulation, surveillance, and criminal punishment. The classical institutions of the bourgeois state have undergone substantial modification, with institutions tending to blur and merge into one another. Institutions lose their distinctive cultures and missions and become part of the amorphous realm of officialdom, which is defined not by a particular public mission, but primarily by the extension of bureaucratic procedures over social life.
What am I signing?
You're acknowledging that you are dead and you agree to all the terms and conditions thereof.
afraid of something like that.
If we consider Angela Nagle's book, Kill All Normies, in light of the new busybody state, we can see that the politics of Tumblr, which is really the politics of a call-out culture, is really only a vigilante version of officialdom. Tumblr and Twitter have become panopticons, in which, quote, the many live in fear of observation from the eagle eye of an offended organizer of public shaming, end quote. And we've all become busybodies. Nagle explains that 4chan culture, which became a resource for the alt-right, can be understood as a countervailing force within the same vacuous moment. In the face of unrelenting pressure from a million neurotic prohibitions, those who have no real commitments or foundational ideas can only turn to a politics of ceaseless transgression.
Would you rather have your child be a feminist or have cancer? And it's like, it's funny, so my freshman year of high school, I was diagnosed with cancer, but like, I'm also, and I hate to break it to you, I'm a feminist too, so like, would you tell my parents, like, when I was diagnosed and like almost about to die, would you be like, I'm so sorry that she also believes in like equality of the sexes? Like, that's such
I see. I would quote my favorite rapper, and I would say, if you can take a dick, you can take a joke.
So, let's posit that the death of God and authority has not led us to freedom. Let's suggest that the seeming absence of foundational principles obscures the rise of a certain capitalist utilitarian ethos, and that under this principle, we don't face major edicts from on high, but rather 1,000 million injunctions from all directions. What this means is that attempts to transgress the busybody ethos sends us off in every direction as well. However, as we notice that, despite the seeming emptiness of modern life, we are not in a world without meaning, but a world that treats humanity as meaningless, while valorizing the products of human labor. What we claim to cherish is utility, but what we call utility is actually something else. If we let Appleton and Nagle be our guides, then it looks like neither efforts to control every behavior through prohibitions, nor efforts to break every prohibition and transgress every boundary have any chance of changing the actual foundation of society or alter our everyday lives for the better. Let's return then to this idea that I mentioned at the start, the law of the negation of the negation. And perhaps the best way to explain that notion would be to take a look at one of the major complaints about Angela Nagle's book that is being tweeted out repeatedly, namely the idea that Nagle is saying that the far left, as embodied by Twitter call-out culture, and the far right, as embodied by frog Nazis, are, in some essential way, the same, or the suggestion that because Nagle is critical of transgressive politics, her politics are centrist. First, Nagle and most sane people are very reluctant to label Twitter warriors as part of the left, as their hyper-individualist, anti-political stances don't rise to the level of actual politics at all, let alone to the level of left politics. Similarly, the Pepe clowns are maybe LARPing fascism, but they have no actual political project. Beyond this, Nagle rejects the idea that's in the background of horseshoe theory, namely that radical politics are always totalitarian, regardless of whether they're on the left or the right. What Nagle would argue is that only a left politics that aims at changing the material foundation of society can possibly lead us out of the current nihilistic impasse. And what I would add is that the left takes in the totality of the problem and thereby bypasses the half measure of state-centered totalitarianism. So, to that negation of the negation, if we understand that the aim of radical politics isn't to achieve control, nor to transgress every limit, but to set the terms for our collective lives consciously, and in such a way as to increase the power and freedom of every individual and of society, we will have to not only negate the barren utilitarian capitalist logic that dominates us, but also to create something new.
It's precisely the sign, one of the signs of our so-called post-political era, where we less and less talk about economy, politics, political structure and so on, and more about culture wars. That is to say, all phenomena, the only way practically to introduce passion into politics, to get out of this grey expert dialogue is to move into the domain of culture wars. And that's what does this say? As I developed in one of my earlier books, I think the lesson is that the two guys who appear to be opposed, Francis Fukuyama and Samuel Huntington, are really two sides of the same coin. You know, Fukuyama, the end of history, that is to say, even if there is a long period of struggle, blah, blah, we have found, according to him, the formula which is, if not the best, at least the least bad of the possible world. Capitalism with liberal democracy. Huntington, on the other hand, as you know, predicts the clash of civilizations, that is to say, culture wars. But I claim culture wars are the mode of political struggles at the point of the end of history.